Here's what some people are saying about the Projection Booth podcast.
The Projection Booth is single-handedly the greatest film podcast you could ever listen to or could possibly want.
Top notch. 5 stars. This has quickly become one of my favorite film-related podcasts. Always interesting.
A completely unpretentious yet fully comprehensive look at films from all genres.
The Projection Booth podcast, with new episodes available every week at projectionboothpodcast.com.
You are listening to the In the Mouth of Dorkness podcast. Here are Brad and Darren.
Welcome to another edition of the ITMOD podcast. With me is Brad Gullickson, Mouth Dork.
Hello!
Yep, and I'm Darren Smith, the Disco Dork. And welcome to our ITMOD podcast, Bruce Lee cast.
Yeah!
Yeah.
It's the D&B show.
The D&B show. So, Brad.
Yes, Darren.
I wanted to have a discussion about Bruce Lee's films, about Bruce Lee in general. You wanted to watch all of his films, so we can talk about it. You wanted to facilitate that discussion for me, which I greatly appreciate. But you said you wanted to do a little special episode as kind of maybe a precursor to this discussion.
Well, yeah, because the truth is that I've only seen Enter the Dragon. And I love Enter the Dragon.
Mm-hmm.
But how can I say that I love Enter the Dragon when I've only seen one Bruce Lee movie, Enter the Dragon? That's not true. I've also seen Game of Death. We will talk more about that film in the future.
Yes.
But that's an uncomfortable movie. It's a weird movie.
Yep.
It makes me feel all squidgy when I watch it. It's got a lot of cool stuff in it.
Yep.
That tracksuit in particular.
Shout out to Wife Dork.
But yeah, so I don't know. I've always meant to dive deeper into his filmography, and I've always dug his personality.
Yeah.
One of my favorite things to do when feeling low is watch a Bruce Lee YouTube clip.
Yeah.
That man will make me feel better about life and humans.
Yeah. He was a very prolific person. His personality is so cool and mellow. When you watch his interviews, I always like the way he says, man. Like, he'll be talking, and, man, it's just, you have to just be cool, man. We're all one family under the sun, in the skies, man. He's a very philosophical person. Like Bruce Lee, most people know, or a lot of people know him from his films, rightfully so, as, a world-renowned, world-famous, and arguably the greatest martial arts entertainer. And that was how his name spread across the world, was his films. But Bruce Lee, outside of being an actor and a practitioner of martial arts, was also a very deep thinker and a philosopher. He was a writer. He was an artist. He drew, and he wrote many books. He wrote books about martial arts, about Kung Fu, about Jeet Kune Do, the style that he pioneered and created. But he also wrote books about philosophy. And to me, outside of, when I was, and I've said this on the podcast before, when I was younger, obviously seeing his films and seeing his martial arts prowess and his skill, that was what attracted me to Bruce Lee, to see this person who was so fast and was so powerful and so agile. Just to see him kicking ass, that as a kid, that was cool to me. And watching his films and just seeing him beat up the bad guys and very rarely getting a scratch, that was what appealed to me as a kid. He was one of my first on-screen superheroes. And as I got older, I found out that he did more than perform in front of cameras. He did more than practice martial arts. He also wrote books. He was very steeped into philosophy, not only his own but of world philosophy, and that caused him to incorporate those and then write his own philosophy. So as an adult, I became infatuated with the person, as opposed to my fascination with him as an actor or an action star. And now more than ever, his writings, his teachings, all things Bruce Lee are available in so many different outlets, books, podcasts, and I appreciate that, and I'm glad, because it gives people an insight into this person that they might not necessarily have had outside of his depiction of characters in movies.
And you have turned me on to the Bruce Lee podcast done by his daughter Shannon Lee.
Yes,
and it's really excellent. It is a deeply philosophical show. The last episode I listened to was from a couple weeks back, and it's called On Being Human, and it's what being human meant from Bruce Lee's point of view, and it's fascinating to listen to. And I am deeply attracted to that aspect of Bruce Lee. I think that's what makes him unique within the landscape of cinema, certainly. But the idea behind this series of episodes, these Bruce Lee casts that we're doing, is we're going to go through certain films in his filmography. We're not going to go through every movie. We're not going to take a look at his portrayal of Winslow Wong in Marlowe, for example.
Right.
Which turns out I have seen that movie. James Gardner.
Yep.
But I think, what are we going to do? We're going to do it chronologically. We're going to start with The Big Boss.
I would say yes. I would say so. We're going to speak about, like Brad said, we're not going to go through necessarily films like Marlowe, but the films that he did. What I would like to do is go through the films that he did in Hong Kong. Bruce Lee tragically has a very small filmography. He only made The Big Boss, Fist of Fury, which is known as Chinese Connection in the States, and Way of the Dragon. And that's the one with Chuck Norris. Enter the Dragon, and then Game of Death, and then his untimely passing. So he only had 5 films.
So we're going to do 5 episodes. Well, I guess we're going to do 6 episodes. This is part 1.
Yes.
So what I wanted to do with this episode was similar to how we've tackled Brian's obsession, shout out to the Turtle Dork, with the Power Rangers and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and we've devoted episodes to why those particular properties have connected so strongly with him. Bruce Lee comes up in like every other episode we record from you.
Yeah.
He's deeply rooted in your psyche.
Yeah.
And I wanted to just tackle why in this episode.
All right.
And I thought where we could start was in your childhood. How did you first encounter Bruce Lee? What was the first movie, TV show, whatever, that you first saw? And if it wasn't your first experience with him, when did you know this guy was the coolest?
So I have my, as for a lot of things, actually for everything good about me, I have my father to thank. That goes beyond films and my knowledge and watching and my past and my history with films. Just everything about my person, my character, my personality. But I have my dad to thank for that, because my father was a huge, and still is, a huge fan of Bruce Lee. So he had seen his movies before I did, and because he knew Bruce Lee was cool, he was like, Darren, you go watch this guy. He's cool. Watch this. And so the first film I saw was Fist of Fury, which in the States it's Fist of Fury, but in China it was released as The Big Boss, and that was Bruce Lee's first starring role in his own film.
So how old were you?
I was probably maybe 4 or 5. I was really young. And again, I gravitated towards Bruce Lee's battle cry and his stance and his lean physique and his quickness and him being a minority, a triumphant Chinaman, him being a hero of his people. And even as a kid, not having the mature understanding of the relevance of that. But as a kid, just feeling like, well, he looks different. He doesn't look like, the heroes from American movies. He's not a white guy. I mean, and he's not big. He's not muscular. And this would stick out to me as I got older.
So would this be like the late 70s you're watching this, or is this the early 80s?
Late 70s, early 80s. I was born in 76, so like the early 80s. And so as I got older, and Schwarzenegger and Stallone and the action heroes of my youth from films over here in my American culture were prominent. Like Bruce Lee was the first one that was outside of my American culture that I saw and gravitated towards and could connect with and relate to. Now,
had you seen Schwarzenegger films before this, or Stallone films?
I believe I saw Fist of Fury. I believe I saw Fist of Fury. So when my dad started introducing me into like action films and like rated R films, because Bruce Lee films are rated R. So I started at a young age. So I was introduced to all of these around the same time. I can't remember specifically which one I was introduced to first, but it was around the same time. There was not a lot of time in between me seeing Bruce Lee that I saw Arnold and Sly, if not the other way around. But either way, it was at the same time. Like I said, I watched RoboCop like at a fairly young age. Like when that first came out, 87. Again, I was born in 76. RoboCop came out in 87. I saw RoboCop in the theaters. So I was 10, 11, and so I was being introduced to action as action cinema, rated R action at a very early age. So I had familiarity with the Terminator. I saw the Terminator when I was really young. That movie scared the shit out of me. That part when he was in the hotel room and his eye was out and he had that hole cut in his arm.
Fuck you, asshole.
I remember being frightened to watch the rest of that movie, seeing that part. So yeah, it was around the same time. But just knowing that, and Bruce Lee was different. Like Arnold and Sly, and
it's not like you dislike those guys.
No. They're a part of my childhood as well. But these guys would shoot. Arnold might punch you, but Arnold was synonymous with big guns, and Stallone, I'm talking about his arms, but he had arms too. But I mean weapons. Like these guys were synonymous with blowing shit up and shooting the place up. Whereas Bruce Lee, his weapon was his body, and as an adult, I would later come to find out it would be his mind and his brain. But as a kid, Bruce Lee was different in that way. So it was like, okay, this guy is using martial arts, kung fu. I like kung fu now, so let me seek out wuxia films, and kung fu theater was a big part of my childhood. So all the Run Shaw films and Golden Harvest films. Kung Fu theater on Saturday would be what I would watch, and the introduction to those films was because I loved Bruce Lee. So I sought, because again at that time Bruce Lee hadn't had his complete filmography out, so there was only maybe like one or two Bruce Lee movies. So in order to watch more movies like that, I would have to go to the other, to Gordon Liu's filmography and James Wong, Carter Wong's filmography and the guys, the Deadly Venom guys, and the films that they would do. So Bruce Lee got me into my love of martial arts because he was my gateway. Because I wanted. There's got to be more guys like him, and fortunately and unfortunately, there's not. There's no one like Bruce Lee. But it did lead me down that rabbit hole of, martial arts films at an early age.
You mentioned your attraction to his battle cry. I mean, what is that? Because when you watch it, my first experience with Bruce Lee was through other pop culture lenses, whether it was like cartoon versions of him on The Simpsons, or stereotypes of him, or rip-offs of him in other action films. So I experienced that battle cry through comedy.
Right.
And I remember when I first saw Enter the Dragon and I saw it in action, how, what's the word? Shocking it is. Wild. and it really separates him from any other performer. Because even in those ripoff characters that would do that battle cry, it's not that cry.
No.
And because it comes from such earnestness, I mean, you respond to it like a really badass catchphrase almost,
So with martial arts, when we look at Van Damme, and you look at Steven Seagal, and you look at even recent guys like Statham, Scott Adkins, specifically to talk about Van Damme. So if you watch a Van Damme film and he does a kick, he kicks a guy, Van Damme's technique is kind of like Chuck Norris in that it's slow and he likes to hold his pose. For him, the technique is what's most important to him, how he looks. Very comic book in its nature, in that you have a panel and you want a hero pose, and so the action is really in the execution of it is more superficial, as opposed to with Bruce Lee. When he does something, he doesn't do it for the sake of being flashy, first of all, and we'll talk about his philosophy on technique. But secondly, like when he does that scream, his battle cry, for me, in the context of that fight sequence, there is character there. I mean, because that battle cry is guttural. It's rage. It's an expression of his anger. And every fight in a Bruce Lee film is an extension of that character being pushed. He's gotten to the point where the only way out of that situation for him is violence. So when in every character he's played up until that point, he's a peaceful person. He's never been the one to go look for, start the fight, or pick the fight. He's always pushed into that particular circumstance to where he personally feels at this moment, this is the only way out. And because you've pushed me to this point, there is some anger there. And so that anger is expressed not only through that violence, but through that battle cry. I mean, he literally sonically expresses his rage. And so for him, that scream that he does in addition to that punch, coinciding with the punch or the kick, is an expression and a release of that anger. To not hold it inside, he will let it out so it doesn't consume him. So he will let it out with the punch, the kick, and that scream. It's just another form of expression for him. And for me, what separates him from the other action stars and martial artists when he does that is because it is an expression. So again, that's a character. That's someone expressing himself. And so it's unique in that within a fight scene, you have a character being someone, being a character, not just, I don't just want you to see this punch and see this kick. I want you to see this character going through something emotionally. And, you might not pick up on it if you're not thinking in those terms. You could just be wowed and wooed by him kicking the shit out of a guy. But if you know Bruce Lee, and if you know his philosophies and his teachings and his reasons for that, when you go back and watch those fight scenes with that in mind, for me, it adds a layer and a depth that you just don't have in a fight scene with Van Damme. Like Van Damme is trying to show you this, look how high I can kick my leg, look at this split. But with Bruce Lee, it's look how far you've pushed me against my principles. And so this is what you forced me to do and become. And I find that infinitely fascinating because it ties into his real life philosophy. And so, yeah, it's just that cry, it's a unique thing. And it's another thing that separates him from everyone else.
Do you remember, you had your dad introducing you to these films, but did you then go and introduce it to your friends, or did you share Bruce Lee with others? Like, when did you become passionate about spreading his word?
So I'm half Japanese and I'm half black. My dad's black, and I grew up in Mississippi, but also split the time in the DMV area, DC, Maryland, and Virginia. But when growing up with my father, I grew up around predominantly blacks. And within the African American culture, Bruce Lee is he's a world renowned icon, but within the black culture, Bruce Lee is seen as something special. He's held in such a high regard. He's seen as one of us. Like, he's seen as, there's another oppressed person who's sticking it to the man. Like, and he has swagger. Like, look at that guy. He's cool as shit. He don't give a shit, and he will whoop your ass. And the black culture responded to that. So growing up around blacks, I didn't have to really spread that. Like, it was like they knew, oh, you like Bruce Lee too? Or, Darren, you have Japanese, Chinese, whatever you are, Kung Fu too? I would always get that. Going to high school, middle school, it could be seen as kind of racist, and it kind of is, but right off the bat, what are you? Because you ain't black. Like, what do you mix? You mix with something? Yeah, I'm half Japanese. Oh, you know karate? You know Kung Fu? You watch Bruce Lee movies? That's racist, but yeah, I do, because he's dope. Yeah, you seen Enter the Dragon? Yeah, that Chuck Norris, man, he fucking. So, like, I didn't have to go really spread the gospel of Bruce Lee. It was something that was already within the culture of people that I was hanging around. And Bruce Lee's just one of those people that within our culture and then just society that you kind of don't have to convince or put him on to a lot of people, because again, he was just so well known and popular and well liked and well received. So it didn't have to do too much convincing. I'm trying to remember. I don't think there have been that many people that I was associated with that had never seen a Bruce Lee movie that I had to say, you need to sit down and you need to watch this guy. You've never heard of him. This is who he is. There haven't been. I don't think I've had that experience as a kid or a teenager. Like, especially in my teens, like middle school, high school, everyone knew who Bruce Lee was. Especially at that point, after his passing, he unfortunately, when he passed, he had already filmed Enter the Dragon, but Enter the Dragon is the film that got him worldwide recognition and stardom. But he had passed at that point. And Enter the Dragon came out, I was already going into my, early teens, mid-teens. So at that point, going into high school, everyone had known about Bruce Lee. And so it wasn't, you couldn't throw a stone and hit someone who didn't know who Bruce Lee was. So I was fortunate enough to be able to just lean over to the next guy and just have a conversation about Bruce Lee, because they had seen and are familiar with his work.
So Bruce Lee died in 1973, the same year that Enter the Dragon was released. Do you remember when you learned that Bruce Lee was dead already? Or did you know that going in?
Yeah, I knew that. I knew that going in. My dad, he showed me the movie, and then sometime after, he would just talk about him and say, he has all these other movies. You need to watch these movies. And I remember asking him, like, why does he only make 5 movies? And my dad was like, well, because he died. And I was like, what? And at this point, there had not been any Bruce Lee documentaries. There not, so it was a bunch of conjecture. It was a bunch of, he died because his body was too fast for his brain, and or he died of a drug overdose, or he was killed by the triad, and it was Chinese mafia involved. It was all these different rumors, and so at that age, I just didn't I didn't know what to believe. I just knew that he was dead. Now that's something that, funnily enough, that's something that I had to spread to people, was that Bruce Lee only made 5 films. So this movie that you're telling other people to watch, or you're asking me, have I seen this Bruce Lee movie? That ain't a Bruce Lee movie. And I remember being pissed, going into the video store and wanting to see another Bruce Lee movie and seeing,
Bruce Lee,
yeah, Rise of the Dragon, or into the or Tiger versus Dragon, starring Bruce Lee, and then on the back, some of them would blatantly say Bruce Lee. Some of them wouldn't say Bruce Lee. Some of them would blatantly say Bruce Lee. But then when you turn on the back, you look at the guy who's playing this character, and it ain't Bruce Lee. I can't tell you how many times like I would go to Blockbuster Arrows and see these movies and be duped, only to flip it over. I would get excited. Oh shit, another Bruce Lee movie? I thought he only made 5. Turns out, shit, it's not Bruce Lee, and I would get pissed. So it was like I made it my mission. Like when I hear people talking about kung fu movies, it's kind of like now when you're in line in the theater or wherever, and there's people behind you talking about film, and you hear somebody say something wrong, and you're like, do I turn around and say, dude, you're lying, you're spreading untruths, or do I just mind my business and bite my teeth? Like, I remember being that way at an early age. But if it was something about Bruce Lee, I don't care if you were talking to me or not. Like, I would join that conversation. I'd be like, no, that's not a Bruce Lee movie. And I would argue, like, up and down. People like, yes, it is. And I saw him in the movie. And like, no, it's not. Bruce Lee only made 5 films. The movie said Bruce Lee and blah, 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 blah. And I just remember having heated debates, like, over and over to different people about the truth of him only having 5 films in his filmography. So I remember that just pissed me off to no end. It just pissed me off to no end that, part of it was because like the truth of it hurt me that he only had 5 films. That there are only 5 movies that I would be able to watch to experience this man as an artist and as this being an extension of who he is as a person. And to this day, it's a tragedy that that I feel some type of way about. Like I really, it's one of those things where we do it all the time. Where we go, oh, what if this person was still alive? What would the music industry be if Tupac and Biggie were still here? Like what would action films be if Bruce Lee were still alive? Definitely, I think more elevated and intelligent and philosophical, but still innovative, because he was someone who never settled for things being the way they were. But he was also someone who strived for realism and a realistic depiction of martial arts, because in doing that, that's how he would reach and teach the world about the benefits of martial arts. Is, well, I can't teach you the benefits of martial arts and why it's important to share the teachings and go against traditional thought of Shaolin Kung Fu should only be for Chinese. You shouldn't teach it to Westerners. The only way that I can get out of that, break the mold of that thinking, is to put these teachings in this movie and show you the benefits of it and show you what these techniques can do and what they look like. But I can't do that if I got wires on and if I'm, running on the top of trees. And not to say that there's anything wrong with that, but Bruce Lee's, his aim in depicting fights in martial arts in movies was realism, because he wanted to show the benefit and the beauty of it, of the technique. And I think that, again, if he were still alive today, man, The Raid and The Raid 2 are amazing action films. But for Bruce Lee, I can't fathom what he would do and what he would have evolved to as far as portraying his philosophies and teaching on the martial arts. I mean, this man created a martial arts style, Jeet Kune Do. Like, he was the founder of that. And people will say, well, yeah, he just took a little bit from here, and there, and called it his own style. Yes and no. Yes, he saw the benefits of boxing. So when you look at something like Way of the Dragon, and at the end he begins to, or any of his films, he begins bouncing around on his tippy toes and his feet. And Chuck Norris is looking at that like, what are you doing? And then Chuck Norris tries to emulate that. Well, the reason why Bruce Lee does that, because he looked at boxing. Again, Bruce Lee was a huge fan of Muhammad Ali. He looked at boxing and he saw that, boxing stance and this jumping around and moving around and not being stationary compared to a traditional Kung Fu stance, is that if I'm in a Kung Fu stance, a traditional Kung Fu stance, and my left leg is back, and I want to throw a kick, a powerful kick, you can telegraph potentially where that kick is going to come from, because my left leg is the foot that's back. My left foot is back. So you could potentially guard, if you're a well enough martial artist, you can defend and be prepared on some level for that, because Well, that kick is coming from the power kick is coming from the left. If you're left-handed and your left hand is your left shoulder's back, you know that power right, that hook, that power punch is going to come from that fist. So you can guard from that. You can watch shoulders. And so you have a definitive stance where you can be read. Bruce Lee saw that, well, when you're boxing, I can switch stances up. I can put my left foot forward for 2 seconds and then bring my right foot forward. So you won't know which direction, if I decide to kick at any given time, you won't know if he's fast enough. I can throw a kick from any given direction, and you can't be fully prepared for that. So let me incorporate that into a style. What he would do, not only would he do things like that, he would draw out, if you look in some of his books, he would draw out specific movements and directions to throw punches from, and he would write why you would throw it from this direction, how you would orientate your body, how fast you would have to throw that punch, and then the benefits, the pros and cons of it. So he would say, you have a martial art like Shotokan, which is a Japanese martial art, or you have a Chinese martial art like Wushu, and in Wushu you throw a punch in this way, but to get to that punch you have to move in a certain way. When you're moving in that certain way, you have a 2-second window where someone could counter you. So how do I throw this punch and remove that 2-second window? He would go back and redesign that technique so that that 2-second window is either shrunken or it's gone. And that would be incorporated into Jeet Kune Do. So he would take all the deficiencies out of all these other martial arts and he would craft new techniques, and the amalgamation of those would become Jeet Kune Do. And so to sit there and think on, very specific level and to dissect these techniques and then put them back together Frankenstein-like and create this wholly unique and new thing where you take the best of all these different things and create something else. I think that's just incredible. Like, that's never been done before, firstly, to a modern martial artist. Like most martial arts have, their techniques are just grounded in, centuries long tradition, and they don't change much. But Bruce Lee was the first to say, and another thing, Bruce Lee never felt like, Chinese Kung Fu is better than karate. Shaolin boxing is better than Wing Chun or Shotokan or whatever. He never felt like one martial art, one technique was better than the other. He always felt like there are some benefits to each and every technique. He always discouraged talking down against another martial art, just like he discouraged talking down against another human being and another belief. Like, he was very and always open-minded, and he saw beauty and benefit in everything, even if it was something that he wasn't familiar with or something that he believed in, and he found ways to incorporate that into his belief system and his philosophy, and that translated into his creation of his martial art in Jeet Kune Do. And again, like, name a martial artist, an action star, who can even come close to doing something that profound and prolific. Like, we just don't get that. We just don't get that in an action star, or in people, like, for that matter, anymore. And so, yeah, like, that always stuck out to me. That was another thing that made me say, this guy is special.
So obviously our listeners can hear the passion for Bruce Lee coming forth from you, and that's always what I've found the most attractive aspect of Bruce Lee is your love for him. Yeah. And I want to tap into that with this series of podcasts. I acknowledge that Enter the Dragon is amazing, and now I want to dive deeper. And so that's what we're going to do.
Yep.
We're going to do the first film, The Big Boss. We'll do it in weekly installments,
yep.
So you can expect that next week, along with our usual review casts and homework episodes and fistfuls. So for the next 5 weeks, you'll get 4 episodes a week from ITMOD.
Yeah, and I think what I want to do is, how I want to approach these Bruce Lee episodes is, we're going to be talking about 5 different films, but for each film, like, the theme and the heart of each episode will be something different and specific to that particular title. Like for The Big Boss, we will talk about that film, but I think the focus of the conversation will be, firstly, your response to it as being a first time watch, but also we'll talk about that being Bruce Lee's first starring role film, and what that did for him and how that was an experience for him. And then with the Chinese Connection, we'll talk about how, what that at that time, the conflict between Japan and China, and how that shaped that movie and the themes of that movie and that story. For Way of the Dragon, we're going to talk about Chuck Norris's iconography versus Bruce Lee's iconography, and how, although they were pitted against each other in that film, how in real life there was a mutual respect. And then Game of Death, we're going to talk about the controversy for me of Bruce Lee's passing, and then them still wanting to throw something together to make a film, and how that was done, and how that's just glaringly obvious in a bunch of scenes. We'll talk about that. And then with Enter the Dragon, we'll just talk about how badass Jim Kelly's afro is, how Bruce Lee wanted to approach a Hollywood film with his philosophies. And that's another thing we'll hint on, is all of the Bruce Lee's philosophies and teachings and stuff like that, how you can see them littered throughout his films. Like that scene in Enter the Dragon in the very beginning when he's having his training time with that young pupil, and he's putting little spurts of his philosophy in the film. That scene on the boat, The Art of Fighting Without Fighting, how that's in there too. We'll talk about those.
So do you want to end on Enter the Dragon, even though it's technically before Game of Death?
You're right. No.
No, should we?
I kind of do, because
I feel like we should, because my fear is that we end this ITMOD series on a bit of a bummer.
Yeah.
I think we should go out triumphant.
Yeah. Just let's do that. Good call. Because Enter the Dragon is such a high note for me. That's an amazing.
I mean, I have seen the movie already.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So, I think the first 4 episodes should be, new fresh experiences for Mouth Dork.
Yeah, sounds good. Oh man, I'm excited. And it's always a good time to go back and watch Bruce Lee films. So if you're listening to this and you want to be privy to the conversation and what we're talking about, I highly suggest rewatching his films. They are currently, you can get like a box set on Amazon for like $19, $30 maybe, and then they have a special anniversary set, which is a bit more, but his films are readily available. So I highly recommend rewatching those.
So in anticipation for this, I did buy that box set.
Yes.
But I also picked up The Big Boss and the Chinese Connection from Shout Factory Select series, because they're like loaded up with special features. So.
Yes. And I think on the when we talk about when we do the Game of Death episode, there is a documentary called the A Warrior's Journey. If you have the Enter the Dragon special edition, or if you get that full-length documentary is on there, and there's a documentary that chronicles the making of Enter the Dragon before Bruce Lee's passing and what he originally wanted that film to be. That film was supposed to be the pinnacle of his teachings. It was supposed to be his teachings incarnate, and his thoughts on the different martial arts. I highly recommend checking that out, firstly because it's just super informative, and more information about Bruce Lee the better. But secondly, to compare that with the finished product of the film, because that will tie into our discussion and points made during that discussion.
We need to come up with a good hashtag for this series. Bruce Lee cast doesn't quite work.
No.
It seems too obvious.
Yeah, we'll charge Lisa with that. She's so smart. And
Enter the ITMOD.
Oh, okay.
Game of ITMOD.
Now you're staring at me expectantly.
The ITMOD Connection. I don't know. We'll have to figure it out.
We'll figure it out and tweet it out. But yeah, that's going to do it for us. Thank you, Brad, for facilitating this conversation.
I am excited.
I'm very excited. And I'm excited for our listeners to reach out to us and converse. I already know Chris Chaka's going to be listening and tweeting the shit out of me regarding Bruce Lee. He better. But everyone else, I want all of our listeners to join in on this endeavor and watch the films, watch Bruce Lee, and also check out that podcast, the Bruce Lee podcast. It is really good. So basically his daughter, Shannon Lee, for each episode, she takes an idea from his philosophical teachings, and she centers an episode around that and how his philosophical teachings can relate to our everyday lives now and how they can be applied. and it's really good.
I'll tweet out a couple episodes.
Yep. All right, that's going to do it for us. You can find Mouthdork at Mouthdork on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Letterboxd, and Untapped. I'm Darren Smith, the Disco Dork, on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and Letterboxd, Facebox. and Wife Dork is at Sidewalk Siren on Twitter and Instagram. And Brian Young is at the Turtle Dork on Twitter, at the Turtle Dork 1 on Instagram, and Brian William Young on Facebook. That's going to do it for us. Thank you all for listening. And until next time.